My mom sold me as a bride to my cousin, so I escaped and started a new life abroad. 2 years later, she's sending photos pretending my grandma's dying to lure me back. I grew up in a campo in the Dominican Republic that taught me my looks were the only thing that mattered. So even though our family was a large contributor to the poverty statistic, my mom spent all her money on liposuction and fillers. And don't get me wrong, she was beautiful. Had brown curls that didn't move, an hourglass figure, heart-shaped lips, but it destroyed her. And the second I was old enough to walk, my grandmother dragged me into it. She taught me how to wrap my thighs in plastic while I slept, how to suck in my stomach for hours at a time. Before any event that would have men attending, my mom brushed my hair with a hot comb. Sometimes it hurt so much that I could feel vomit rising in my throat. So while my brothers were encouraged to play baseball as their way out, my life was filled with beauty pageants, push-up bras, and learning how to dance, which really just meant throwing it back until a gringo finally decided to sleep with you. All my mom wanted was for me to find a nice tourist, puncture a hole in the rubber, and baby trap him. By the time I hit puberty, men at the colmado started calling me Morena Linda and offering free sodas. My abuela would show me what to wear, how to seem effortlessly sexy in a way that tricked men into thinking I was innocent. My beauty was admired, but my brain was ignored. But that didn't stop me from my tiny acts of rebellion. I stopped saying gracias when men catcalled me. At the parties I went to before I turned 16, I managed to sneak in non-alcoholic beer. I even started reading books and studying at night while everyone was asleep. It always made me sad knowing I'd never get to use the knowledge. Knowing girls like me didn't belong in that world. Until one day, when I met Preston. He was wearing a white and blue striped shirt, beige shorts, genuine smile. When he walked into the family business, my mommy was staring at me, so I was forced to follow the routine. I walked up to him, ran my hand down his chest, and asked where he was from. And instead of getting all flustered and flirty like every other man, he didn't even glance in my direction. "What kind of cologne do you guys recommend?" he asked, genuinely curious. For some reason, my guard came down. I stopped pretending to be a bimbo and actually spoke like a normal person. That's when the craziest thing I'd ever seen happened right before my eyes. The smarter I sounded, the more interested he seemed. For the first time, I got that butterflies feeling people always talk about. He was the first man I actually wanted. After he paid, he asked me to go on a walk with him. I don't even know why I agreed, but I did. And instead of asking me for a massage or a manicure, he asked me questions about myself. And when no one was looking, he slipped me a card. Turns out he was a journalist for a large media company. He invited me to go to Santiago and join a project he was a part of, one about women in the developing world. For weeks, I kept an eye out for a chance to leave and run away, but it never felt like the right time. Plus, I didn't want to abandon my family. But then one night, my cousin was over and enjoying dinner with me, Mommy and my abuela. Mommy disappeared into her bedroom and came out with a family heirloom necklace. "Your grandmother gave this to me the night before I married your father." She was smiling so bright that her face was practically beaming. And that's when my cousin said something that changed everything. "Mi amor, mi mujer, you look so beautiful." A feeling of dread filled my stomach. I looked over at my family expecting them to be just as shocked as me, but instead, they just laughed. That night, I took money from the family piggy bank, grabbed a bag of my clothes, and kept Preston's card safely tucked into my bra. I didn't tell anyone I left, just left a note that said, "I won't be anyone's prize." It took me almost 12 hours to get to Chile, but as soon as I walked in, I knew it was worth every second, because for the first time in my life, no one looked at my body, just the notebook in my hand. When I saw Preston, his face lit up. He gave me $300 in cash and told me I could buy whatever clothes I wanted. I bought the baggiest outfit I could find, cut my hair short, didn't wear makeup. It was so unfamiliar that I was scratching my legs for the entire day, but I felt free. Preston helped me open a freelance account. I started learning from other women who had the same dream as me, to change the world. And one day, while I was getting ready for bed, I got the call. It was Preston. He told me that someone had come in who loved my work. My heart raced, and all logic went out the window. It was exhilarating. On the way there, I planned what I was going to say, whether I should hug them or not. But as soon as I arrived, I wanted to unalive myself, because standing right there was my cousin, down on one knee with a ring in his hand. My blood turned to ice as I stared at Miguel. The room spun around me, my carefully constructed new life crumbling before my eyes. I glanced at Preston, whose face had transformed from excited to confused in seconds. His eyes darted between us, trying to make sense of what was happening. The office was empty except for the three of us. The computer shut down for the night. The ring in his hand was gaudy, with a large fake diamond that caught the light in a way that made it look like it was winking at me mockingly. My throat closed up, making it hard to breathe. The taste of mint toothpaste turned bitter in my mouth. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, my knuckles turning white from the pressure. The distance between the door and where Miguel knelt seemed both impossibly vast and terrifyingly small. Miguel stood up, tucking the ring box into his jacket pocket with a sickeningly sweet smile. He told Preston that I was his intended, that our families had arranged everything before I ran away like a child. When he reached for my hand, I jerked back, hissing at him not to touch me. When I demanded to know how he found me, Miguel's smile faltered slightly as he explained that family has ways, that my mother had been sick with worry. Preston stepped between us, finally sensing the tension. He told Miguel there had been a misunderstanding, that Miguel had claimed to be a publisher interested in my work. Preston's protective stance gave me a moment to collect myself, to push back the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. I could see the confusion and concern in his eyes, the way his brow furrowed as he tried to understand the situation. He was taller than Miguel but leaner, and I worried about what what would happen if this confrontation turned physical. Miguel laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. He said he was interested in my work as his wife, bearing his children, keeping his home. Looking at me over Preston's shoulder, he informed me that plane tickets were booked for tomorrow, that my mother was waiting. His laugh echoed in the empty office, bouncing off the walls and surrounding me like a physical threat. When he spoke of my work as his wife, he made a crude gesture with his hands that made my stomach turn. The mention of children, his children, made me feel violated, as if he had already claimed ownership of my body and its functions. My legs nearly gave out. Tomorrow, he planned to drag me back tomorrow. I backed toward the door, telling him I wasn't going anywhere, that I'd left that life behind. Miguel's face hardened as he accused me of abandoning my family and responsibilities to play pretend journalist with gringos. He gestured dismissively at Preston, who looked completely lost but stood his ground, telling Miguel to leave since I clearly didn't want to go with him. The door handle pressed into my back as I retreated, cold metal through the fabric of my sweater. My vision narrowed, focusing only on Miguel and the exit, calculating whether I could make it out the door before he could reach me. The office that had become my sanctuary now felt like a trap, with too much distance between me and escape. When Miguel called my work pretend, heat flashed through my body, temporarily replacing fear with anger. The articles I had written, the research I had done, the voice I had found, none of it was pretend. It was more real than anything I had ever done in my previous life. Miguel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, offering to let me speak to my mother. I could hear her voice coming through the speaker, pleading with me to come home. The sound of her voice, manipulative as it was, still tugged at something deep inside me. For a brief, terrible moment, I wavered. My mother's voice was thin and crackling through the phone's speaker, but I could hear the familiar cadence, the way she emphasized certain syllables, the slight tremor that appeared when she was trying to manipulate emotions. She was crying, saying my name over and over, asking why I would hurt the family this way, why I would abandon them after all they had done for me. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, washing over me in a wave that threatened to drown my resolve. Images flashed through my mind. My mother cooking my favorite meals, braiding my hair when I was small, working long hours in our shop to provide for us. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and hearing her distress caused an almost physical pain in my chest. Then I remembered the plastic wrapped around my thighs at night, the hot comb burning my scalp, the way my family laughed when Miguel called me mi mujer at dinner. I straightened my spine and found my voice, telling him to inform my mother I was sorry she was upset, but I wasn't coming back. The memories came in rapid succession, the constant criticism of my appearance, the way my intelligence was dismissed, the plans made for my life without my consent. I remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep because nothing I did was ever enough. The mornings I woke up hating my reflection because I had been taught to see only flaws. I remembered the way my mother had nodded approvingly when Miguel called me his woman, the way she had fastened that necklace around my neck like a collar. As these memories flooded back, I felt my resolve strengthen. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady and clear, cutting through my mother's pleas and Miguel's expectant stare. I stood taller, no longer pressed against the door but standing firmly in the middle of the room, claiming my space. Miguel's face darkened with rage. He lunged forward, but Preston blocked him, firmly telling him that I'd made my choice and he needed to leave. Miguel glared at Preston, then at me, warning that this wasn't over, that family doesn't give up so easily. He stormed past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. Miguel's movement was so sudden that I didn't have time to flinch. His face transformed from manipulative charm to naked fury in an instant, his features contorting into something barely recognizable. When he lunged, his hands were outstretched toward me, fingers curled like claws ready to grab, to possess, to drag me back to a life I had escaped. Preston's reaction was immediate. He stepped directly into Miguel's path, his body becoming a physical barrier between my cousin and me. Though Preston wasn't particularly large or imposing, in that moment he seemed to grow in stature, his presence filling the space between us. His voice, when he told Miguel to leave, held no room for argument. It was a command, not a request. When Miguel bumped into me on his way out, the force of it sent me sideways, my hip colliding painfully with the edge of a desk. The physical contact felt like a violation, a reminder of how he viewed me as something he could push, pull, and position according to his will. The door slammed behind him with such force that the windows rattled, the sound echoing in the now silent office. When the door slammed behind him, my legs finally gave out. I sank into the nearest chair, trembling uncontrollably. Preston crouched beside me, apologizing profusely. He explained that Miguel had contacted the office claiming to represent a publishing house interested in my pieces on women's experiences. I nodded, still shaking, and told him it wasn't his fault, that Miguel was persistent. The chair I collapsed into was cold and hard, but I barely noticed. My entire body was trembling, not just my hands, but my legs, my shoulders, even my jaw, making my teeth chatter as if I were freezing. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the air conditioning, and my stomach churned threateningly. Preston's face was pale with concern and guilt as he knelt before me, his hands hovering near mine but not touching, respecting my space even in this moment of crisis. His apologies tumbled out in a rush, explaining how Miguel had emailed the office with a professional-looking signature, how he had spoken eloquently about my work, how convincing his interest had seemed. With each word, Preston's distress grew more evident. He blamed himself for bringing this danger to my door. I wanted to reassure him, to absolve him of guilt, but speaking required more energy than I could muster. My throat felt tight. tight, constricted by fear and the effort of holding back tears. When I finally managed to form words, they came out in a whisper, assuring Preston that Miguel would have found me eventually, that his determination was a force I had always known I couldn't escape forever. When Preston suggested calling the police, I shook my head. Miguel hadn't done anything illegal, and involving police would only complicate things. I needed to move immediately. He knew where I worked now, and would find out where I lived soon enough. The thought of police involvement sent a fresh wave of panic through me. In my experience, authorities rarely helped women in my situation. They would ask questions I couldn't answer, demand documentation I didn't have, possibly even contact my family for verification. And Miguel had done nothing technically illegal. He hadn't physically harmed me, hadn't explicitly threatened me. He had only come to propose marriage, an act that would seem romantic rather than terrifying to an outsider who didn't understand the context. Besides, involving police meant creating a record, leaving a trail that Miguel could follow. What I needed was to disappear again, to become invisible to the eyes that were searching for me. The urgency of this realization gave me strength to push through the paralyzing fear, to start thinking practically about my next steps. Preston helped me back to my apartment, insisting on checking inside before letting me enter. Though it was clear, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. Miguel was in Chile. He'd found me. The walls that had once felt like protection now seemed paper thin. The walk back to my apartment was tense, both of us constantly looking over our shoulders, jumping at shadows and the sound of footsteps behind us. The city that had become my home now felt hostile, filled with hiding places where Miguel might be watching, waiting. Preston kept himself between me and the street, his body language alert and protective. My apartment building was small and unremarkable, with peeling paint on the exterior and a security door that never quite closed properly. As we approached, I scanned the street for any sign of Miguel, a figure leaning against a lamppost, a car with a driver watching the entrance, any indication that I had been followed. Though I saw nothing suspicious, the fear remained, a cold weight in my stomach. Preston insisted on entering first, checking each room of my tiny studio, the main living area, the bathroom, even opening the closet and looking behind the shower curtain. Though the apartment was obviously empty, his thoroughness was comforting, an acknowledgement that my fear was valid, not paranoid. Once inside, the space that had become my sanctuary felt contaminated. I looked at my possessions, the books carefully arranged on makeshift shelves, the plants I had begun to nurture on my windowsill, the colorful throw pillows I had bought to make the place feel like home, and wondered how quickly I would need to abandon them. The thought brought a fresh wave of grief. I was tired of leaving things behind. I threw clothes into my backpack while Preston made calls, looking for a safe place for me to stay. Every sound from the hallway made me jump. Preston finally told me his friend Valentina had a spare room on the other side of the city where I could stay until we figured something out. I nodded gratefully, too numb to speak. My hands moved automatically, grabbing essentials and stuffing them into my backpack with little thought for organization. Underwear, t-shirts, my toothbrush, the notebook where I kept ideas for articles. I moved quickly but quietly, as if Miguel might hear me packing from wherever he was in the city. Each creak from the old building sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing on another floor, the elevator humming as it moved between levels. Preston paced near the window as he made calls, his voice low and urgent, explaining the situation without providing specifics that could be overheard. I caught fragments of his conversations. Needs a place tonight, not safe here, just until we figure something out. Between calls, he would glance at me with worried eyes, checking my progress, offering silent encouragement. When he finally announced that his friend Valentina had agreed to take me in, the relief was so intense that my knees nearly buckled again. The fact that this stranger was willing to shelter me, to potentially put herself at risk for someone she had never met, brought tears to my eyes for the first time since Miguel had appeared. These were not tears of fear, but of gratitude, of being seen as someone worth protecting. As I zipped my backpack, I noticed the family heirloom necklace sitting on my dresser, the one I'd received in the mail weeks earlier from my mother, a silent plea to return home. I hesitated, then stuffed it deep into my bag, not because I wanted it, but because leaving it behind felt like another thing Miguel could use to track me. The necklace lay on my dresser where I had tossed it upon receiving it, the gold catching the light from my bedside lamp. I had been tempted to throw it away when it arrived, this symbol of everything I was running from, but something had stopped me. Perhaps a lingering connection to my past, or simply the practical knowledge that gold had value that might be needed someday. Now, looking at it, I felt conflicted. Leaving it behind seemed dangerous. What if Miguel broke in and found it? Confirmation that he had the right apartment. But taking it meant carrying a piece of that life with me, the very life I was trying to escape. In the end, practicality won out. I wrapped the necklace in a sock and buried it at the bottom of my backpack, where I wouldn't have to see it but would know it was secure. Valentina turned out to be a photographer who worked with Preston occasionally. Her apartment was small but welcoming, filled with plants and photographs of strong, beautiful women from around the world. She showed me to her spare room without asking questions, just squeezed my shoulder and told me to make myself at home. Valentina lived in an older building with an ornate facade and a tiny elevator that creaked alarmingly as it carried us to the 5th floor. Her apartment smelled of cinnamon and coffee, with large windows that looked out over a small park. Unlike my sparsely furnished studio, her space was filled with color and texture, vibrant throw rugs, cushions in jewel tones, walls covered in photographs that captured women in moments of strength and vulnerability. Valentina herself was nothing like I expected. In my mind, a professional photographer would be sleek and sophisticated, but she greeted us in pajama pants and a faded t-shirt, her hair piled messily on top of her head. She was older than me, perhaps in her late 30s, with laugh lines around her eyes and a streak of gray in her dark hair that she made no attempt to hide. The spare room she showed me to was small but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a small desk beneath the window. A bookshelf along one wall held photography books and novels in both Spanish and English. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and I noticed a small bundle of dried flowers hanging from the curtain rod. That night, I barely slept. Every car passing outside, every creak in the building had me sitting bolt upright, heart racing. By morning, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but my mind was clear. I couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, Miguel would find me again. The night stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the soft chiming of a clock somewhere in Valentina's apartment. I lay rigid beneath the quilt, my body exhausted but my mind racing, replaying the encounter with Miguel, imagining worst-case scenarios, planning escape routes. The unfamiliar shadows of the room shifted and moved with each passing car, sometimes taking on shapes that made my heart race. Was that a figure by the door? A hand reaching for the window? When sleep did come, it was fitful and filled with dreams of being chased, of running down endless corridors that led nowhere, of Miguel's face transforming into my mother's, then my grandmother's, all of them reaching for me with hands that turned to claws. I woke repeatedly, gasping for breath, my t-shirt damp with sweat despite the cool night air coming through the partially open window. The first light of dawn brought a strange clarity. As I watched the room slowly brighten, the shadows retreating to reveal ordinary objects, a chair, a lamp, a stack of books, I felt my mind settling into a calm determination. Running had kept me safe temporarily, but it wasn't a long-term solution. Each new hiding place was just that, a hiding place, not a home. I needed something more permanent, something that would put me truly beyond Miguel's reach. Preston arrived early with coffee and news that Miguel had returned to the office looking for me. When Preston wouldn't tell him anything, Miguel had made threats, saying he had friends in Chile who could make things difficult for both of us. I apologized for dragging him into this, but Preston shook his head, insisting it wasn't my fault. We needed a more permanent solution than just hiding me. The coffee Preston brought was still hot, the steam rising from the paper cups filling Valentina's kitchen with a rich aroma. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he had slept as poorly as I had. As he recounted Miguel's return to the office, his hands tightened around his cup, knuckles whitening with suppressed anger. Miguel had apparently arrived first thing in the morning, demanding to know where I was staying. When the receptionist claimed ignorance, he had pushed past her to Preston's desk, his voice loud enough that the entire office could hear his accusations, that Preston had stolen his fiancée, that he was interfering in family matters, that there would be consequences. Security had eventually escorted him out, but not before he had made it clear that he wasn't giving up. My apology was automatic, the guilt immediate. Preston had only tried to help me, to offer me an opportunity, and now he was being threatened because of it. But Preston's response was firm. This wasn't my fault. It was Miguel's. The problem wasn't that I had sought freedom, but that Miguel refused to accept my choice. His conviction was so strong that I found myself nodding, accepting his perspective even if I couldn't fully believe it yet. Valentina, who'd been quietly listening, suggested the job in Madrid that had loved my articles. I'd almost forgotten about the international magazine that had expressed interest in my work before Miguel showed up. Preston nodded enthusiastically, pointing out that if I were in Europe, it would be much harder for Miguel to follow me, and with a work visa, I'd have legal protection. Valentina sat at her kitchen table in a silk robe, her hair still tousled from sleep, cradling her coffee cup in both hands. When she mentioned Madrid, her voice was casual, as if suggesting a weekend trip rather than a life-altering move, but her eyes were sharp, watching my reaction carefully. The magazine she referred to was a prestigious international publication that focused on women's issues globally. They had contacted me after reading an article I had written about beauty standards and economic opportunity, expressing interest in having me contribute regularly. At the time, I had been excited but hesitant, unsure if I was ready for such a big opportunity. The contact had come just days before Miguel appeared, and in the chaos that followed, I had completely forgotten about it. Preston's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious. He began listing the advantages. A European work visa would provide legal status that would make it much harder for Miguel to claim any right to contact me. The distance would make physical pursuit more difficult and expensive, and the professional opportunity would advance my career significantly. As he spoke, his hands gestured animatedly, spilling a few drops of coffee onto the table, which he hastily wiped up with a napkin. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since seeing Miguel on his knee. When I asked if they'd still want me, Preston promised to call them right away. While he stepped outside to make the call, Valentina sat beside me on the couch and quietly observed that men like my cousin don't see women as people, but as possessions. The hope I felt was tentative, fragile, a small flame that could be extinguished by a single word. What if the magazine had found someone else? What if they had changed their minds about my work? What if they couldn't help with a visa? These questions swirled in my mind as Preston stepped onto Valentina's small balcony, phone pressed to his ear, his back to us as he paced the limited space. Valentina's observation about men like Miguel was delivered matter-of-factly, without the drama or pity that often accompanied such statements. She spoke from experience, I could tell, though she offered no details about her own past. When she said the word possessions, she gestured to a photograph on her wall, a striking black and white image of a woman breaking free from chains, her face a mixture of pain and determination. I nodded, thinking of all the women in my campo info who had been treated the same way. My mother, my grandmother, all the girls who never got away. I confessed that my mother had arranged it, promised me to Miguel before I even left. Valentina's eyes softened as she told me that sometimes the people who should protect us the most are the ones who hurt us the worst. As I spoke about the women in my community, memories surfaced. My friend Lucia, who had been married at 16 to a man 20 years her senior, my cousin Elena, whose husband checked her phone every night, the neighbor who wore long sleeves even in the hottest weather to hide the bruises on her arms. These women had accepted their fate as inevitable, as the natural order of things. I had almost become one of them. The confession about my mother's arrangement with Miguel felt like releasing a heavy weight I had been carrying. I had suspected it for some time, but saying it aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. My mother had not just accepted Miguel's interest in me, she had encouraged it, facilitated it, planned for it without my knowledge or consent. Valentina's response held no judgment, no shock, just a deep understanding that made my eyes fill with tears. When she spoke of those who should protect us hurting us instead, she reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to, and gently covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm against my skin, the simple human contact offering comfort without demands. Preston returned with exciting news. They still wanted me and could expedite the visa process. I could be in Madrid within 2 weeks. 2 weeks seemed like an eternity to hide from Miguel, but Valentina squeezed my hand and assured me I could stay with her, that she'd help keep me safe. Preston burst back into the apartment with an energy that transformed the atmosphere, his face alight with excitement. The magazine not only still wanted me, but they were enthusiastic about helping with the visa process. They had connections with Spanish immigration officials and could arrange for an expedited work permit. They wanted me to start a series on women's experiences across Latin America, with my own story potentially serving as the framework. 2 weeks. The time frame hung in the air between us, simultaneously offering hope and presenting a challenge. 2 weeks of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of wondering if today would be the day Miguel found me again. The thought was exhausting, but the alternative, staying in Chile indefinitely, always running, was worse. Valentina's offer to let me stay came without hesitation, as if sheltering a stranger from a possessive cousin was the most natural thing in the world. She explained that her work often took her out of the apartment during the day, but she would make sure I had everything I needed, and she would be home every night. Her hand squeezed mine gently, the pressure a silent promise of protection. For the next few days, I barely left Valentina's apartment. I worked remotely, finishing articles and preparing for the Madrid position. Preston brought updates. Miguel had been asking around the media company, trying to get information about me from other employees. So far, no one had told him anything. Valentina's apartment became my world, its boundaries both confining and comforting. I worked at the small desk in the spare room, the window offering a view of the park below where children played and couples walked hand in hand, living normal lives that seemed increasingly foreign to me. My laptop became my connection to the outside world, to the work that had become my purpose and my escape. I wrote feverishly during those days, pouring my experiences and observations into articles that seemed to flow directly from my heart to my fingertips. Perhaps it was the confined space, or the looming deadline of my departure, or simply the need to process everything that had happened, but my writing took on a new depth and urgency that even I recognized as powerful. Preston visited daily, sometimes bringing food or supplies, always bringing news. Miguel had been persistent, approaching different employees each day, sometimes with friendly questions, sometimes with thinly veiled threats. He had described me as mentally unstable, as having run away from needed medication and family care. The lies were calculated to sound concerned rather than controlling, to paint him as a worried fiancé rather than a possessive cousin. Then came the morning Valentina burst into my room, her face pale. She pulled me to the window to show me someone watching the building, a man who'd been there for hours. I peered through the blinds and recognized one of Miguel's friends from back home. My heart sank. They were closing in. I had been in the middle of editing an article when Valentina entered without knocking, something she had never done before. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an urgency that immediately set my heart racing. She was still in her pajamas, her hair uncombed, suggesting she had noticed the watcher immediately upon waking. The blinds in my room were partially closed, thin slats of light striping the floor. Valentina positioned me carefully to the side of the window, where I could see out without being easily spotted from below. The man standing across the street was leaning against a tree, pretending to read a newspaper, but clearly watching the building entrance. It was Javier, one of Miguel's closest friends from our hometown, a man who had always looked at me in a way that made my skin crawl. The sight of him, so far from home, so clearly on a mission, made my stomach clench with fear. Javier was known for his loyalty to Miguel, for doing whatever was asked of him without question. His presence meant Miguel had expanded his search, had somehow tracked me to this neighborhood, this building. We were no longer safe here. Preston agreed we needed to move me again. It wasn't safe at Valentina's anymore. This time, we went to a small hostel on the outskirts of the city. I checked in under a false name, paid cash, and kept to my room. Preston brought me a prepaid phone, telling me to use it only for emergencies and to contact him. The decision to move was made in minutes, the three of us recognizing the danger without needing to discuss it at length. I packed quickly, taking only what would fit in my backpack, leaving behind some clothes and books that Valentina promised to keep for me. We left through the service entrance at the back of the building, Valentina checking first to make sure no one was watching that exit. The hostel Preston found was in a working-class neighborhood far from the city center, a nondescript building that catered mainly to laborers looking for cheap accommodation. The room was basic: a narrow bed with thin sheets, a small bathroom with unreliable hot water, a window that looked out on an alley rather than a street. But it had the advantage of anonymity. The desk clerk barely glanced at me when I checked in, too busy watching a football match on a small television to care about another guest. The prepaid phone Preston gave me was an old model, nothing like the smartphone I had become accustomed to using. It could make calls and send basic text messages, nothing more. The simplicity of it was actually reassuring. No apps that could track my location, no social media that could be monitored, just a direct line of communication to the few people I still trusted. 5 days before my flight to Madrid was scheduled, I received a text from my mother on this new number. My blood ran cold. How had she gotten this number? The message contained only a photo of my grandmother, looking frail in a hospital bed, with the words, "She's asking for you. Come home now." The text arrived while I was trying to sleep, the phone's harsh beep cutting through the silence of my hostel room. The screen lit up the darkness, illuminating the peeling wallpaper and casting strange shadows across the ceiling. When I saw my mother's name, my first reaction was disbelief. I had given this number to no one except Preston and Valentina. How had she found it? The photo loaded slowly on the basic phone, the image appearing in sections from top to bottom. My grandmother's face came into view first, her skin ashen, her cheeks hollow, her eyes closed. She lay against white hospital pillows, an oxygen tube visible in her nostrils, a hospital bracelet around her thin wrist. The sight of her looking so fragile, so different from the strong woman who had raised me, sent a physical pain through my chest. The message accompanying the photo was brief but effective, designed to cut through any defenses I had built. My grandmother had been the complicated center of my childhood, the one who had taught me to wrap my thighs in plastic, yes, but also the one who had snuck me extra food when I was hungry, who had defended me against my father's criticisms, who had taught me to read before I started school. The thought of her asking for me, made all my resolve waver. I stared at the image, tears welling in my eyes. My abuela, despite everything, had been the only constant in my life. The thought of her possibly dying, without me there, tore at my heart. I showed the message to Preston when he visited that evening. He gently warned it could be a trap. I knew he was right, but still wondered what if it wasn't. What if she really was sick? The tears came without warning, hot and fast, blurring the image on the screen until I could no longer make out my grandmother's face. I curled up on the narrow bed, the phone clutched to my chest, torn between suspicion and grief. Part of me wanted to book a flight immediately, to rush to her bedside, to hold her hand one last time. Another part recognized the timing as too convenient, the message as too manipulative. When Preston arrived that evening with dinner, a paper bag containing empanadas and fruit, I was still in the same position, though the tears had dried on my cheeks. Wordlessly, I handed him the phone, watching his face as he read the message and studied the photo. His expression shifted from confusion to concern to suspicion, his brow furrowing as he considered the implications. His warning that it could be a trap was delivered gently, his voice soft with compassion for what he knew must be my conflicted feelings. He pointed out the strange timing, the fact that they had somehow obtained this new number, the way the message was designed to provoke an emotional rather than rational response. But he also acknowledged that it could be genuine, that my grandmother might truly be ill, and that I had to decide for myself what to believe. Preston took my hands in his and reminded me that if I went back now, I'd never leave again. They'd make sure of it. Deep down, I knew the photo could easily be old or manipulated. This was just another tactic to lure me back. I wiped away tears and admitted I couldn't go back, not even for her. Preston's hands were warm around mine, his grip firm but gentle, anchoring me in the present moment rather than the swirl of guilt and grief threatening to pull me under. As he spoke about the reality of returning, his eyes held mine steadily, compassionate but unflinching in their honesty. If I went back now, all my efforts would be for nothing. The freedom I had fought for, the career I was building, the new life I had created, all would be sacrificed. The realization that the photo could be manipulated came slowly, pushing through the emotional fog. My mother had access to old photos of my grandmother in hospital. She had been treated for pneumonia 2 years earlier. Or this could be recent but taken out of context. A routine checkup made to look more serious with careful framing and lighting. Or, most painfully to consider, it could be genuine, but still used as a tool to manipulate me rather than out of real concern for my feelings or my grandmother's wishes. Admitting aloud that I couldn't go back, not even for her, felt like both a betrayal and a liberation. My voice cracked as I spoke the words, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Preston squeezed my hands in silent support, offering a tissue from his pocket, giving me space to feel the full weight of this decision without trying to rush me through it. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my hostel room door. My heart leapt to my throat as I heard Miguel's voice demanding I open the door. I frantically gathered my things, shoving them into my backpack. The bathroom window was small, but I thought I could fit through it. As Miguel continued pounding, I climbed onto the toilet and pushed the window open. Just as I was about to hoist myself up, the pounding stopped. I heard the manager's voice, then Miguel's, growing fainter as they walked away from my door. The pounding jolted me from a fitful sleep, so violent that the cheap door rattled in its frame. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure where I was, the unfamiliar room coming into focus slowly. Then I heard Miguel's voice, and terror shot through me like electricity, fully awake in an instant. "I know you're in there. Open this door now." His voice was controlled, but with an undercurrent of rage that I recognized all too well. "Your mother is worried sick. This This game has gone on long enough. I moved silently. Years of practicing quiet movements in my family home serving me well now. My few possessions went into my backpack with mechanical efficiency. Clothes, toiletries, documents, the prepaid phone. My hands were steady despite the fear coursing through my veins, my body operating on pure survival instinct. The bathroom was tiny, barely large enough to turn around in, with a toilet, sink, and shower stall crammed into the space. The window above the toilet was small and rectangular, designed for ventilation rather than escape. It had no screen, which was fortunate, but opened outward on hinges, which meant I would have to contort my body to fit through the narrow opening. Standing on the toilet lid, I pushed the window open as far as it would go. Outside was a fire escape, rusty but seemingly stable, leading down to the alley behind the hostel. Just as I was preparing to push myself through the opening, the pounding abruptly ceased. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the noise had been. Then came voices, the hostel manager's gruff tone questioning, Miguel's smooth response, their words indistinct but their footsteps clearly moving away from my door. I remained frozen in position, half in and half out of the window, afraid to move lest any sound bring them back. Only when the voices had completely faded did I allow myself to breathe again, slumping against the bathroom wall in relief. I slumped against the wall, breathing hard, too close, way too close. I called Preston, who arrived within the hour to move me again, this time to a friend's vacation apartment that was currently empty. 3 more days until my flight. Just 3 more days of hiding, of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at every sound. My hands shook so badly that I misdialed twice before managing to connect with Preston. My voice was a whisper when he answered, afraid that somehow Miguel might still be nearby, might hear me through the thin walls. Preston's response was immediate. Stay put, touch nothing. He would be there as soon as possible. The wait for his arrival was excruciating. I sat on the edge of the bed, backpack on, ready to flee at the slightest sound of Miguel's return. Every footstep in the hallway, every voice outside, every car passing on the street sent my heart racing. I found myself holding my breath, releasing it only when the potential threat had passed, then holding it again at the next sound. When Preston finally knocked, 3 soft taps, our agreed-upon signal. The relief was so intense that my legs felt weak as I moved to open the door. He looked as tense as I felt, his eyes scanning the hallway before quickly ushering me out. We took the back stairs rather than the elevator, emerging into the alley where a taxi was waiting, engine running. The friend's apartment was in an upscale neighborhood, a stark contrast to the hostel. It was on the 10th floor of a building with security at the entrance, a doorman who nodded politely as Preston explained I was his cousin staying for a few days. The apartment itself was spacious and impersonal, clearly a place used occasionally rather than lived in. Expensive furniture but no personal photos, high-end appliances but an empty refrigerator, large windows with a view of the city, but curtains that had been closed for some time, judging by the dust that floated in the sunlight when Preston pulled them open. 3 more days. I counted the hours in my head. 72 hours until I would board a plane to Madrid, until I would be truly beyond Miguel's reach. The time stretched before me like an eternity, each minute a potential opportunity for discovery, for my carefully laid plans to unravel. The night before my departure, Preston and Valentina came to say goodbye. They brought food, wine, and something unexpected, a small going-away party with 3 other women I'd met through my writing, women who had become friends, mentors, allies in my journey. Valentina explained they wanted to celebrate my courage and talent. The knock on the apartment door startled me despite being expected. I had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between checking my packed bag to make sure I had everything, and staring out the window at the city that had briefly been my home. When I opened the door to find not just Preston and Valentina, but 3 other women as well, I was momentarily speechless. They filed in carrying bags of food, bottles of wine, even a small cake with Buena Suerte written in blue icing. The apartment, which had felt cavernous and empty during my brief stay, suddenly came alive with voices and laughter, with the sounds and smells of a celebration. The contrast to my previous days of silent hiding was jarring but welcome. The 3 women were all people I had met through my work. Lucia, an editor who had helped shape my first major article, Carmen, a human rights lawyer who had provided quotes and context for a piece on domestic violence laws, and Daniela, a fellow writer who had become something of a mentor to me. They hugged me warmly, treating my imminent departure as an achievement rather than an escape, focusing on the opportunity awaiting me rather than the circumstances forcing me to leave. For a few precious hours, I forgot about Miguel, about my family, about the constant fear. We ate, drank, and talked about the future, my future in Madrid, writing stories that mattered. The food they brought was a feast compared to what I had been eating. Empanadas filled with spiced meat and olives, a fresh salad with avocado and lime, crusty bread with olive oil for dipping, a platter of cheeses and fruits. We ate around the dining table, passing dishes back and forth, filling and refilling glasses with rich red wine that loosened tongues and eased tensions. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on work, on politics, on books we had read and places we had visited. When the topic turned to Madrid, everyone had suggestions, neighborhoods to explore, restaurants to try, museums that shouldn't be missed. They spoke of my move as an adventure, an opportunity, a beginning rather than an ending. Their enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself genuinely excited about what awaited me, rather than simply relieved to be escaping. As the evening progressed, we moved to the living room, sprawling across sofas and armchairs, the formality of dinner giving way to to the intimacy of friends sharing stories. Lucia described her first international assignment and how terrified she had been. Carmen admitted to throwing up before her first major court case. Daniela confessed that she still got rejection letters that made her cry. Their vulnerability made my own fears seem normal, manageable, part of the journey rather than obstacles to it. As they were leaving, Preston handed me an envelope containing my plane ticket and visa documents. Everything was set for tomorrow. I hugged him fiercely, unable to adequately express my gratitude. He smiled, though his eyes were sad, and made me promise to keep writing, saying the world needed my voice. The envelope was thick, containing not just my plane ticket and visa documentation, but also a letter of introduction to the magazine's Madrid office, a map of the city with the office location circled, and information about the apartment they had arranged for my first month. The papers felt heavy in my hand, weighted with possibility and promise. My hug nearly knocked Preston off balance, my arms wrapped tightly around his neck, my face pressed against his shoulder. He had become more than a colleague, more than a friend. He had become the person who believed in me when I barely believed in myself, who had seen value in my voice when I had been taught it had none. Words seemed inadequate to express what his support had meant, so I simply held on, hoping he understood what I couldn't articulate. When we finally separated, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, his smile tinged with sadness. He held my shoulders gently, looking directly into my eyes as he made me promise to continue writing, to use my experiences to help others, to never let fear silence me again. His belief in my abilities was so genuine, so unwavering, that I found myself nodding, making the promise not just to him, but to myself. The goodbyes with the women were equally emotional, Valentina holding me tightly and whispering that she was proud of me, Lucia pressing her business card into my hand and insisting I send her my first article from Madrid, Carmen offering legal contacts in Spain should I ever need them, Daniela giving me a journal with a note inscribed inside that she made me promise not to read until I was on the plane. Each farewell was a mixture of sadness and celebration, of ending and beginning. After they left, I double-checked my packing, making sure I had everything I needed for my new life. At the bottom of my backpack, I found the family necklace. I held it up, watching it catch the light, this piece of gold that had been passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, always with the same expectation, to marry, to serve, to continue the cycle. The apartment felt suddenly quiet after they left, the silence rushing back in to fill the space their voices had occupied. I moved through the rooms, straightening cushions, gathering empty glasses, keeping my hands busy to distract from the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Tomorrow I would leave Chile, leave the first place where I had begun to discover who I really was. The thought was bittersweet, excitement for what lay ahead mixed with sadness for what I was leaving behind. My backpack sat ready by the door, containing everything I would take to my new life. On impulse, I opened it one last time, checking that I had my documents, my few precious books, the clothes I would need until I could buy more. At the very bottom, wrapped in the sock where I had hidden it, was the necklace. I unwrapped it carefully, holding it up to the light. The gold chain was delicate but strong, the rose pendant intricately detailed, the tiny diamond catching and reflecting the light from the lamp beside me. In this quiet moment, alone with this piece of my history, I allowed myself to really look at it, to consider what it represented. This necklace had been presented to me as a symbol of my future, a future decided by others, a future that valued me only as a wife, a mother, a possession. But it was also a link to my past, to the women who had come before me, women who perhaps had their own dreams that went unfulfilled, their own voices that went unheard. The necklace itself was neither good nor bad. It was the expectations attached to it that had been suffocating. I considered leaving it behind, this symbol of everything I was escaping, but something stopped me. This necklace was part of my story, part of what had shaped me. Instead of rejecting it entirely, perhaps I could redefine what it meant. For a moment, I was tempted to leave it on the bedside table, to abandon it as I had abandoned the life it represented. It would be symbolic, a physical rejection of everything I had been running from. But as I prepared to set it down, something stopped me, a realization forming slowly in my mind. This necklace was more than just a symbol of oppression. It was a piece of my history, a connection to the women in my family who had lived within the constraints of their time and culture. My grandmother, who had taught me those harmful beauty practices, had also been the one to slip books under my pillow when I was young, who had secretly encouraged my reading even while publicly focusing on my appearance. My mother, for all her flaws, had worked tirelessly to provide for our family, had endured hardships I could only imagine. Leaving the necklace behind felt suddenly like leaving them behind entirely, like denying the complexity of our relationships, the good mixed with the harmful. Perhaps instead of rejecting it, I could reclaim it, redefine it, carry it with me not as a symbol of what I was expected to be, but as a reminder of where I had come from and how far I had traveled. The next morning, I took a taxi to the airport, constantly checking to make sure I wasn't being followed. Every step through the terminal, every moment in the security line, I expected to hear Miguel's voice, to feel his hand on my arm, but nothing happened. At the gate, I finally allowed myself to breathe. In just a few hours, I would be on my way to Madrid, to a new life, to freedom. The morning dawned clear and cool, the sky a pale blue that promised warmth later in the day. The taxi driver was an older man who hummed quietly to himself as he drove, asking no questions about my destination or my single backpack, for which I was grateful. I sat in the back seat, constantly turning to look out the rear window, scanning for any car that might be following us, any face that might be watching. The airport was crowded, crowd, filled with travelers pulling suitcases, families saying goodbyes, business people checking watches impatiently. I moved through this sea of humanity feeling simultaneously exposed and invisible, worried that Miguel might spot me at any moment, yet also aware that I was just one more anonymous traveler in a busy international terminal. The security line moved slowly, each step forward bringing a mixture of relief and anxiety. I presented my passport and boarding pass with a steady hand that belied the rapid beating of my heart. The security officer glanced at my documents, then at my face, then back at my documents before nodding me through. No questions, no suspicions, no problems. I resisted the urge to look back as I collected my backpack from the X-ray machine, forcing myself to move forward, only forward. At the gate, I found a seat against the wall, positioning myself to see everyone who entered the waiting area. The flight was scheduled to board in 30 minutes. Just 30 more minutes in Chile, 30 more minutes of vulnerability before I would be safely on my way to Madrid. I allowed myself a small sip from the bottle of water I had purchased, my first moment of something approaching relaxation since leaving the apartment that morning. Then I saw him, Miguel, standing near the boarding area, scanning the crowd. My heart stopped. How had he known? Who had told him? I ducked behind a pillar, mind racing. The boarding had already begun. I had to get on that plane, but Miguel was standing between me and the gate. The water bottle slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, spilling across the floor. Miguel stood less than 20 feet away, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark pants, his hair neatly combed, looking for all the world like any other traveler. But I knew the set of his shoulders, the way his head moved as he scanned the crowd, the predatory patience in his stance. My mind raced frantically. How had he known which flight? Had he been watching the apartment? Had someone at the airline given him information? Had one of Preston's colleagues betrayed us? The questions were irrelevant now. What mattered was that he was here, and he was between me and freedom. The boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, passengers beginning to line up, creating movement and confusion in the gate area. I pressed myself against the pillar, trying to make myself smaller, invisible, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps that made me lightheaded. The distance between my hiding place and the boarding gate seemed impossible to cross without being seen. As I stood there, paralyzed with indecision, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I nearly screamed, whirling around to find an elderly woman smiling at me. She asked if I was boarding the Madrid flight, and I nodded, too stunned to speak. She continued chatting, telling me her granddaughter was meeting her there, that it was her first time visiting since her granddaughter moved. She peered at me more closely, asking if I was all right, noting that I looked frightened. The tap on my shoulder nearly stopped my heart. I spun around, a small sound of fear escaping before I could stop it, expecting to find Miguel's triumphant face. Instead, I found myself looking at an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a concerned smile. She was small, barely reaching my shoulder, dressed in a floral blouse and comfortable traveling pants. A large shawl draped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the terminal. Her question about the Madrid flight was asked in a conversational tone, as if we were acquaintances who had happened to meet rather than strangers in an airport. When I nodded, unable to form words through the tightness in my throat, she continued talking, filling the silence with stories about her granddaughter who had moved to Madrid 2 years ago to study art history and was now working in a museum. Her voice was soft but clear, her manner unhurried despite the boarding announcement that had just been made. It was when she mentioned that I looked frightened that I really focused on her face, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, the way her head tilted slightly as she studied my expression. There was something about her, a warmth, a perception, a quiet strength that broke through my panic. In that moment of connection, I saw not just a kindly older woman, but a potential ally, someone who might understand without requiring explanation. Something in her kind eyes broke through my panic. I found myself explaining in a rushed whisper about Miguel, about needing to board without him seeing me. The woman's face hardened with understanding. Without another word, she opened her large shawl and put her arm around me, tucking me against her side so the shawl partially concealed me. She firmly told me to walk with her and keep my head down. The words tumbled out in a desperate whisper. A cousin who wouldn't take no for an answer. A family who had promised me to him. My escape to build a new life. His determination to drag me back. I didn't give details, just the bare outline of my situation, but it was more than I had intended to share with a stranger. Something about her presence made the truth spill out, as if she had opened a door I couldn't close. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. The kindly expression hardened into something fierce, a protective anger that transformed her face. Without hesitation, she unwrapped the large shawl from her shoulders, a beautiful woven piece in shades of blue and purple, and opened it like wings. She stepped close to me, putting her arm firmly around my waist, arranging the shawl so that it draped over both of us, partially obscuring my face and form. "Walk with me," she instructed, her voice low but authoritative. "Keep your head down. Let me do the talking." There was no room for argument in her tone, no question that I would follow her lead. She had taken charge of the situation with a confidence that suggested this was not the first time she had helped someone in trouble. Together, we approached the gate. I could see Miguel from the corner of my eye, still scanning faces, not looking at the elderly woman shuffling past him with what appeared to be her granddaughter. We made it to the gate agent. I handed over my boarding pass with trembling fingers, holding my breath as it was scanned. The agent nodded, and we continued down the jetway. Only when we were on the plane, finding our seats in different sections, did the woman squeeze my hand before moving to her seat, whispering for me to be brave, that I was doing the right thing. Our progress toward the gate was slow but steady, the woman setting a pace that seemed natural for someone her age. She kept up a stream of quiet conversation, speaking just loudly enough to be heard by anyone nearby, talking about Madrid's museums and how I would love the Prado, how her granddaughter would show me all the best cafes, how excited she was for us to finally meet. The fiction she created was seamless, requiring no input from me beyond an occasional nod. Miguel stood near the boarding desk, his attention focused on each passenger as they presented their documents. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it, the sound filling my ears and making it difficult to focus on anything else. As we drew closer, I kept my head down as instructed, watching only the floor passing beneath our feet, trusting this stranger to guide me safely past the danger. The moment of presenting my boarding pass was excruciating. My hand shook visibly as I extended the document, and I kept my face turned away, ostensibly looking at my companion but actually hiding from Miguel's searching gaze. The gate agent glanced at the pass, then at me, then at the pass again before nodding us through. No questions about why I was huddled under a stranger's shawl, no comment on my obvious distress, just a routine scan and a gesture to proceed. The jetway stretched before us like a path to salvation, each step taking me further from Miguel, closer to freedom. Only when the plane door was visible ahead did I dare to breathe more deeply, to lift my head slightly, to believe that I might actually escape. On the plane, the woman guided me to my seat before continuing to her own, several rows behind. As she prepared to leave me, she squeezed my hand firmly, her palm warm and dry against my cold fingers. "Be brave," she whispered, her eyes holding mine intently. "You are doing the right thing." Then she was gone, moving down the aisle to her own seat, leaving me with the gift of her protection and her certainty. I settled into my window seat, still watching the boarding door anxiously. Minutes ticked by. More passengers filed in. No Miguel. When the cabin door finally closed, tears of relief sprang to my eyes. I had done it. I had escaped. The window seat offered a view of the terminal building, and I pressed my face close to the glass, scanning for any sign of Miguel rushing toward the plane, demanding they reopen the doors. Each new passenger who entered the cabin made me tense, expecting to see his face appear in the aisle. But as the minutes passed and the flow of boarding passengers slowed to a trickle, hope began to grow. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, closing overhead compartments, their routine preparations for takeoff a surreal contrast to the life-changing moment I was experiencing. A man took the aisle seat in my row, nodding politely before opening a newspaper. The middle seat remained empty, a small blessing that meant I wouldn't be pressed against a stranger for the long flight ahead. When the cabin door finally closed with a definitive thunk, the sound released something inside me. Tears welled up and spilled over, running silently down my cheeks as relief flooded through my body. I turned my face toward the window, not wanting to draw attention, letting the tears flow freely for the first time in what felt like forever. They were not tears of sadness, but of release, the tension, fear, and uncertainty of the past weeks finally finding an outlet now that I was truly safe. As the plane taxied away from the gate, I took out the family necklace one last time. In Madrid, I would write the stories of women like me, like my mother, like my grandmother. Women trapped by expectations, by tradition, by men who saw them as prizes to be won, rather than people with dreams of their own. I fastened the necklace around my neck, no longer seeing it as a chain binding me to the past, but as a reminder of where I came from and why I had to leave. The necklace lay cool against my skin as the plane began to move, the gold warming gradually to my body temperature. I thought about the women who had worn it before me, my grandmother, my mother, and wondered if they had ever dreamed of escape, if they had ever imagined a different life for themselves. Had they accepted their fate willingly, or had they simply lacked the opportunities, the support, the courage that I had found? In Madrid, I would have the chance to use my voice, to tell not just my story, but the stories of women across Latin America who lived under similar expectations. I would write about beauty standards that valued appearance over intelligence, about economic systems that made women dependent on men, about cultural traditions that treated daughters as commodities to be traded. I would write with the understanding that came from experience, with the compassion that came from knowing these women were not just subjects, but reflections of a life I might have lived. The necklace, which had once represented my predetermined future as someone's wife, someone's possession, now took on new meaning. It became a talisman of transformation, a symbol of how something passed down with one intention could be reclaimed and repurposed with another. I fastened it around my neck, not as an acceptance of tradition, but as a reclamation of heritage, a way of carrying my past with me, while moving decisively toward a different future. As the plane lifted into the air, carrying me toward my future, I made a silent promise to all the women I'd left behind. I would use my voice, my words, my freedom to tell our stories, and maybe someday, those stories would help other women find the courage to say what I had written in that note so many months ago. I won't be anyone's prize. The sensation of takeoff pushed me back against my seat, the power of the engines vibrating through the cabin as the plane gathered speed. Through the window, I watched as the ground fell away, the airport becoming smaller, the city of Santiago spreading out below, the mountains rising in the distance. Chile, which had been both my refuge and my hiding place, receded beneath me, becoming part of my past rather than my present. As the plane climbed into the clouds, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the necklace against my collarbone, a tangible connection to where I had come from. But my thoughts were already turning toward Madrid, toward the stories I would tell, the life I would build, the woman I would become. The promise I made was not just to those I had left behind, but to myself, to use my freedom well, to make my voice heard, to never again allow anyone to treat me as a prize to be won, rather than a person with dreams of my own. When the plane leveled off above the clouds, I opened my eyes to a new perspective: the endless blue sky above, the soft white carpet of clouds below, and ahead, though I couldn't see it yet, a future of my own choosing. For the first time in my life, I was truly free.